Clara Winslow threw her weight against the carriage door just as the wheel struck stone. The world tilted. Wood screamed along the axle. Cold air rushed in where glass had been, and Lady Delphine, all 73 years of her, silver hair pinned beneath a travelling bonnet, slid sideways in a storm of cushions and shawls. Clara caught her by the elbow before her aunt's temple met the splintered frame. "Up," she said, her voice flat with the precision of someone who had already calculated what the next 2 seconds would cost. "Up, Aunt Delphine. Now." "Child, I am 8 stone, and you are perhaps 6. Up!" She set her shoulder beneath Delphine's arm and lifted. The carriage groaned around them. One horse shrieked on the road outside, the other sawed against the harness with a sound like a saw going through something that was not wood. Clara could feel the whole vehicle shifting toward the verge. 3 inches. 4. Hunting for the drop. Rain drummed the roof. The floorboards had gone to a slant she did not trust. She got Delphine to the high side door and shoved it open like a hatch. Cold autumn rain slapped her face. Sage-green cloak soaked through in the space of one breath. "Out," Clara said. "Lean, I have your waist." "You have a grip like a dock worker, child." "I know. You may thank my brother for it when I see him." She said it easily, the lie she had learned to tell, and she lifted her great-aunt into the rain. Her boots struck the road and sank. The lane was black mud and fallen beech leaves, churned by the rain to a skin. She got Delphine 3 paces clear of the tilted carriage before the vehicle gave a final wood and iron sigh and settled on its side with a crash that sent rooks screaming from the gatehouse oak. The screaming horse was still screaming. Clara left her aunt propped against the ditch wall, unhooked her cloak, and dropped it across the old woman's shoulders, and ran. She did not think about what she was running toward. She thought about the harness buckles. She had been trained to hunt with her brother since she was 12. She had freed a wounded hound from a gin trap at 14. Her hands knew things her head had not yet caught up to. The offside horse was pinned at the shoulder by the shattered trace, rolling white eyes and snapping at air. Clara dropped to her knees in the mud. "I know," she said to the horse. "I know. Hold still." She got her fingers under the belly strap. The leather was slick with rain and pink froth from where the bit had cut the animal's mouth. Her knuckles split on the buckle. She did not notice. The gate beyond the oak opened. She did not hear the hooves over the rain. What she heard, finally, was a voice. Dark, pitched for command, arriving from behind her at exactly the volume that carries through storm. "Step back from the horse." "No," Clara said. Silence. Then the voice again, 1 half-step closer. "Madam, step back." "The strap is seized. If I leave it another minute, she will tear her shoulder out trying to rise. I have the angle. You do not. Stand by her head and keep her still." A pause, in which the universe briefly considered its options. Then boots. Good boots, heavy, cavalry-heeled, moved past her in the mud, and a hand she did not look at closed on the horse's bridle, with the calm weight of someone who had held far worse. Clara worked the buckle free. The horse shuddered and lay still. "There," she said, and sat back on her heels in the mud, and became aware, all at once, of her hair running water down her jaw, her split knuckles, and the man standing over her. He was taller than she had pictured from the voice. Broad through the shoulders in a way good tailoring could only admit, not hide. Dark hair soaked to black. A line of pale, old scar tissue ran from the hinge of his jaw down under the collar of his greatcoat. Grey eyes the colour of wet slate. Perhaps 27, 28, perhaps younger still, and carrying something that aged him. He looked down at her with an expression she could not immediately read. It was not anger. It was not gratitude either. It was the kind of attention a soldier gave to a thing that had done something he had not expected a thing like that to do. "Your aunt," he said. Against the wall, dry enough, concussed, possibly. The carriage caught her temple. "You are not her maid?" "No." Companion. She wiped mud from her chin with the back of a bleeding hand, and succeeded only in spreading it.
Clara Winslow, sir, and since I am at a disadvantage crouching in a ditch, who are you?
He considered her for one long breath before answering. Ashby, he said. This is my road.
Then your road is badly drained, Mr. Ashby. The culvert under the oak is blocked.
His mouth did something that was not quite a smile. It was the first sign she had that he possessed the muscle group at all. Noted, he said. Will you stand, Miss Winslow, or have you committed to the mud?
Both, she said,
and let him put his hand under her elbow and lift her out of it. His grip was a blacksmith's, the fingers of a man who had lifted things heavier than her for years. She felt the jolt of it all the way up the inside of her arm, and for a reason she did not examine, she did not let go when she found her feet. He released her. She released him. They stood in the rain. Men were coming up the lane at a run now. Stablemen, a groom, someone she supposed must be a steward, and the world came back in. Delphine was lifted. The horses were seen to. Clara was wrapped in someone else's dry coat and propelled, half numb, through the great gate and up a drive flanked by lime trees gone autumn gold. The rain thinned as they walked. The drive curved. Fallen leaves lay in drifts against the stone verges, amber and copper, and the deep wet red of the last of the beach. A cock pheasant ran across the path ahead of them, and the groom, without breaking stride, clucked at it, the way a man clucks at a small child who has strayed. Somewhere beyond the lime avenue, rooks were settling back into their oak after the disturbance of the fallen carriage, their argument carrying across the wet fields in the particular reedy note rooks used when they had decided the world was mostly safe again, but not entirely. The lime trees thinned, the drive widened. A pair of iron gates opened, and Clara, for a moment, stopped walking, because she had not expected the house. Ravenscar Hall rose at the end of it like a held breath. Grey stone, tall windows, a courtyard that had once held carriages in such numbers that 3 sets of grooves had been worn into the cobbles. Now empty. A house that had been full once, and was no longer. Clara had time to register none of this before she was inside, and wet, and being told, politely, firmly, in the way servants in great houses told people who had not come prepared, that a fire had been made up in the blue room, and that her Grace's physician had been sent for, and that tea would be brought directly.
Her Grace?
Clara said. The housekeeper, a sturdy woman of 50-odd, keys at her waist, face kind but tired, turned her face away.
Forgive me, miss, a habit from before. His Grace does not use the title in the house.
His Grace, Clara repeated. The Duke of Ravenscar, miss. You are standing in his hall. Clara looked down at her mud-plastered boots and her soaked sage-green cloak, and the cut on her knuckles that had just begun to sting in the warmth, and said, with feeling, I insulted his drainage. The housekeeper's mouth twitched. I heard, miss. We all did. You are the first person in 4 years to speak to His Grace in that tone, and receive a reply.
What was the reply?
He told me to send you dry stockings. Clara began, very slowly, to laugh. She could not help it. It came up out of her the way laughter always did when everything was wrong. Her cloak ruined, her knuckles split, her great-aunt upstairs possibly concussed, and a duke somewhere in this grey house who had just recovered her stockings. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pelham as it turned out, watched her laugh for a long moment. Something in her face eased. I am glad, Mrs. Pelham said, and she said it as though it cost her. I am very glad you are here, Miss Winslow. I am not here for long, Clara said, still wiping her eyes. Once my aunt is well, we go on to her sister in York. Mrs. Pelham did not answer this. She only nodded, as people do when they are being polite about a thing they know better than you do, and shepherded Clara up the broad staircase toward a fire and dry stockings, and a house that had not held a woman's laugh in it since the year of Waterloo. By the time Clara came down for supper, the rain had stopped and the wind had risen,
and Ravenscar had arranged itself into a very particular kind of silence. It was not the silence of empty rooms. The hall had a full staff. She had counted 11 faces between the front door and the upper gallery. It was the silence of people stepping carefully around something that had once exploded. Voices dropped when she approached. Doors closed gently.
A footman who caught her eye looked away as though he had been caught doing something improper. Delphine, thank God, was conscious. Bruised along the temple, with a cut that wanted 2 stitches and a pulse the physician had called spirited, given the circumstances. She was sitting up against 3 pillows in the blue room, scolding the housemaid for fetching the wrong shawl, and Clara kissed her forehead and left her to her dominion. "You will take supper with His Grace," Mrs. Pelham said on the landing. Alone with him? In the small dining room, he asked. Did he? He asked, Miss Winslow. I should not make much of it, but he asked. Clara, who had only one dry gown in her entire luggage, and that an unforgiving amber muslin, rather too fine for the country, went downstairs. He was standing at the mantel when she came in, one hand braced on the marble, the other holding a glass he was not drinking from. He had changed into a dark indigo coat and a linen shirt open at the throat. In the firelight, the scar along his jaw was silver. He turned when she entered, and for a moment he did not speak, and Clara had the distinct and unwelcome experience of being looked at by a man who was remembering how to do it. Miss Winslow. Your Grace? You will call me Ashby in my own house. I am not in the mood for titles tonight. Your Grace, my aunt has raised me very carefully. I will manage Sir if pressed, but I cannot promise Ashby on the first evening. The corner of his mouth did that thing again. It was almost a smile. Sit, he said. She sat. The table was laid for 2 in a room meant for 20. The candles were new. Someone had cut late chrysanthemums for the centre, copper and bronze, heavy with the last of the garden. Someone had cared, even in the silence. He served her himself, which was irregular. He poured her wine without asking, which was worse. She did not protest, because she was hungry, and because she had spent the afternoon deciding that she would allow this man all the small irregularities he wished, until she understood what he was. You ride, he said, after a long pause filled by the sound of soup. I ride. Hunt. My brother's fault. He set me on a 14-hand pony at 6 and refused to let me down. Where is your brother now, Miss Winslow? Clara lifted her spoon, set it down, lifted it again. France, she said. Some part of it. He did not come back from Waterloo. The Duke's hand paused, very briefly, above his glass. My condolences. Accepted and set aside. I do not use them. I use the pony lessons. He looked at her for a long moment across the candles. You laugh about it, he said. It passes the time, Your Grace. Ashby. Ashby. He drank. She drank. The fire shifted in the grate and sent a shower of sparks up the flue. And she had the sudden, piercing impression that she had walked into this house by accident, and that it had closed behind her, and that she was not yet sure whether she minded. You will stay, he said, until your aunt is fit to travel. Yes. Mrs. Pelham will see to anything you require. Thank you. A silence. Ashby, she said. Miss Winslow. Your staff are frightened of you. He did not flinch. He did not set down his glass. He only looked at her with the full, steady weight of the grey eyes, and said, Yes. Should I be? No. Very good. I shall not be, then. He held her gaze a beat longer than was polite. You, he said, very softly, are a strange companion to bring to a sickbed. So my aunt tells me. Constantly. This time the smile almost arrived. Almost. It was the faintest softening at the corner of his mouth, a movement so small she would have missed it
if she had not been watching for it. It was gone before she had finished breathing in, but it had been there. Clara picked up her glass and drank her wine slowly, and did not say anything at all, because she had learned long ago that the moments you wanted to keep were the moments you did not narrate. She could not sleep. The blue room was warm. The bed was hung with old embroidered curtains in faded peacock blue, and someone, probably Mrs. Pelham, had put a warming pan in it while she undressed. The quilt smelled of lavender and cedar. It was, objectively, the most comfortable bed she had occupied in 3 years of companions' rooms and second-best guest bedchambers. She lay in it and stared at the canopy, and could not make her eyes close. She was 23, a year older than her brother had been when he rode south with his regiment, and she had been a companion for 2 of those 3 years since the letter came. The position had not been a kindness from her Uncle Matthew. It had been a quiet economy. There was a living to be made from reading aloud to elderly relations in better houses than one's own, and Clara had made it, cheerfully and well, because the alternative was sitting in Hertfordshire thinking about Thomas. Movement had always been her answer to grief. Her Aunt Delphine had understood this before Clara had understood it herself, and had offered her travel and companionship, and, as it turned out, carriages that chose inconvenient roads. She had not expected the inconvenient road to deposit her here. The blue room was full of small disciplines of care. 3 clean candles on the mantel, a decanter of fresh water beside the bed, a pair of felt-lined slippers set by the hearth, sized by guess, but with a tolerance she appreciated. Whoever had prepared this room had prepared it not for a stranger, but for a guest, in the old-fashioned sense, a person one had meant to honor. It did not match the silence of the house. The house was too quiet. Not the quiet of sleep, the quiet of a house holding its breath. Somewhere below, floorboards shifted. A man walking slowly. Not retiring. Walking. At 1:30 by the long case clock in the gallery, she gave up. She found her wrapper, found her slippers, and went to find a book. The library at Ravenscar took up the entire east wing of the ground floor. She had not seen it in daylight. At 1:30 in the morning, with a single branch of candles burning on the great desk, and a fire sunk to embers in the marble grate, it was the kind of room that made you forget what you had come in for. Books from floor to ceiling, a ladder on a brass rail, 3 long windows with the shutters drawn, 2 wing chairs by the fire, a globe larger than a child. Maps unrolled across the desk. Not old maps, recent maps. Estate maps. Tenant boundaries, drainage channels, stands of timber. He had been working. He was still working. He looked up from the desk as she came in, and it was very evident that he had not expected her, and also that he was not going to tell her to leave. "I could not sleep," she said. "No. I came for a book." "Take one." She did not move. He did not move. They considered each other across the length of the library. "Your drainage," she said. "You're fixing it." "I am considering fixing it." "May I see?" He hesitated. She watched him do it, the small, brief recalculation of a man unused to another person in the room when he was thinking. Then he gestured her forward. She crossed to the desk in her wrapper, and did not feel the impropriety of it, because there was nothing improper in him. He moved the candlestick closer. He did not touch her. He did not stand too near. He angled the top map toward her and let her read. She read for 3 full minutes in silence. "The Oak Gate Culvert," she said at last. "That is where we came off today." "Yes." "You have marked 6 others like it." "Yes." "May I ask something impertinent?" "You have been impertinent since you arrived, Miss Winslow. You need not ask." "Why are you doing this at 2 in the morning?" He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he reached over her shoulder and tapped one point on the map, a cluster of small rectangles in the South Valley. Cottages. "Because these flood," he said, "if the culverts do not clear before the November rain. And it is October." "How many families?" "9. "And if you do not clear them?" "They move into the village. The old man loses his workshop. The widow loses her hens." "I am trying," he said, in the same even voice he had used at dinner. "To keep my people breathing, Miss Winslow. I am not always good at it, but I am trying." Clara did not answer. She looked at the map. She looked at his hand still resting beside it, broad, scarred across 2 knuckles, utterly still. She looked up at his face in the candlelight, and she saw, for the first time, what the feared Duke was. He was a man who had been given too many lives to keep, and was afraid, every hour, of dropping one of them. She closed her hand over his, very briefly. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then she took it away. "If you will show me the ledgers," she said, "I will make you a schedule. I have done worse for my uncle's tenant farms. 9 families in 3 weeks, if you lend me a clerk and a horse." He looked at her as though she had said something in a language he had almost forgotten. "Why?" he said. "Because my aunt will take a fortnight to travel," Clara said, "and I do not sit well, Ashby. It makes me dangerous." This time the smile happened. It was very small, and it was very tired, and it did not reach his eyes. But it happened. For 1 whole second of that October night, Ravenscar Hall contained a duke who was smiling at a woman in a wrapper over a drainage map. And nothing, for that 1 second, was wrong at all. The next day she stopped waiting to be invited and simply began. "Mrs. Pelham." When Clara presented herself at 7 in the stillroom and asked for the household ledgers and a list of the tenants and the dairy schedule, put her hand against the doorframe and made a sound that was almost laughter and almost tears. "Miss Winslow," she said, "bless you. It is a fortnight, Mrs. Pelham. It is not a rescue." "It is both," Mrs. Pelham said. They sat together at the stillroom table for 2 hours. The ledgers came out. Clara made notes. She asked about cottages. She asked about the dairymaid's brother who had been let go. She asked about the October rents, which she gathered had been half collected, and then abandoned when his Grace had ridden out toward a neighbour's fence 2 weeks ago, and not returned until dawn. She did not ask what he had been doing. She did not need to. By the end of the 2nd day, she knew the name of every tenant on Ravenscar land. The South Valley cottages were sound and wanted only the culverts clearing. Old Mr. Rigby's workshop had a cracked lintel, but a good roof. The widow Barton kept 17 hens, 2 geese, and 1 extremely opinionated gander. There were 23 children under 14 on Ravenscar land that autumn, and 4 of them, the Lester twins and the Miller boys, would need shoes before the frost came in, because the cobbler in the village had been short-worked for 2 years, and their parents had been saving up the worn pairs longer than was kind. Clara wrote it all down. She wrote it in the back of her own travelling Bible, because no one had given her a notebook, and she had come to Ravenscar expecting to read aloud to her aunt, and had not expected to audit anything. By the end of the 3rd, she had begun to turn up in rooms where she was technically not required. She appeared in the kitchens at 6 to ask about the bread. She appeared in the stables at 10 to thank the groom who had steadied her off-horse the day of the accident. She appeared at the edge of the servants' hall at supper one evening, carrying a tray of pears from the orchard, because she had been in the orchard, and there had been pears, and no one had thought to bring them in. The orchard itself was a small revelation. It lay on the south side of the kitchen garden, ringed by an ancient brick wall that had gone soft at the top with moss. 7 old trees, heavy-branched, still bearing in this late October, russets and a handful of late pears, and 1 enormous Branley that had already dropped half its fruit into the long grass. Clara had walked into it on the 3rd afternoon, in search of an hour to herself, and had come out an hour later with her hem wet, her hair coming down, and 2 dozen pears collected in the upturned skirt of her apron. She had not walked in a walled orchard since the year before Thomas went south. She had not realized, until she walked in one, how much of her had needed to. Little domestic economies revealed themselves as she moved through the days. The linen cupboard at the top of the east stair held sheets embroidered in a hand Clara did not recognize. Not the housekeeper's, not any she had seen in the letters or account books. Mrs. Pelham, asked in passing, said only that they had been the late Duchess's work, and that His Grace had not asked after them in 2 years, and that perhaps the time had come to use them again. Clara said perhaps it had. The sheets went onto the Duke's bed that evening, and no one said a word about it, and the evening passed the same as every other evening, except that one silver-embroidered corner peeped out from beneath the coverlet when the footman opened the shutters the next morning, and Ashby paused for half a breath over his razor when he saw it. Ashby watched her do it. He did not comment. He did not interfere. He did not move through his house any differently than he had before she arrived, but the house moved differently around her, and he noticed. In the fourth morning, she wore an amber muslin day gown, the color of the lime tree leaves outside the windows, and a footman paused with a tray half lifted off a sideboard, because the light from the south casements had struck her hair, and he had briefly forgotten what he had been carrying. Clara thanked him by name for his steadiness with the tray. The footman set down the tray. The footman did not, in the course of the afternoon, forget anything else at all, though his ears were rather pink for an hour. Small things changed in the house without announcement. A bowl of late apples appeared on the hall table, set there because Clara had come in with her hands full of them, and no better place. The shutters in the long drawing room were opened for the first time since winter, because Clara had passed the door, and remarked to Mrs. Pelham that it was a pity to waste a south light. The grey cat that lived in the muniment cellar, Clara had not yet seen the muniment cellar, but she would, appeared in the kitchens at dusk, for the first time in 3 years, and allowed the scullery maid to scratch its ear. The scullery maid wept, discreetly, into a clean cloth. No one asked her why. A footman, Harris, who had flinched when his master walked past for 2.5 years, stopped flinching in the second week, because Clara had stopped in the passage and asked him, by name, to settle a dispute about whether a pear tart ought to have cinnamon in it. "You smile at him," Ashby said to Clara on the 4th morning. They were in the south gallery. She was walking. He was, as far as she could tell, standing still and being walked past. "At Harris?" "At Harris." "He is very earnest about cinnamon, Your Grace. I reward earnestness." "Ashby." "Ashby?" He fell into step beside her. It was the first time he had done so. She was acutely, ridiculously aware of his shoulder at her shoulder, the exact half-inch of space he left between them, the quiet way he matched her pace without making her slow for him. "Miss Winslow." "Hmm? Is that what you are doing to my household?" "What?" "Rewarding earnestness." "I am being civil, Ashby. You should try it." "I am civil." "You are correct. You are not civil. You are correct. There is a difference." They walked the length of the gallery in silence. At the far end, where the windows looked out over the west lawn, gone amber with fallen leaves, he stopped. "Thank you," he said, "for the pears." She laughed. He looked briefly thunderstruck at having caused a laugh and not having had to try. "You are welcome," she said. "Ashby, a question." "Yes?" "When, exactly, did you last sit in a room with someone who was not afraid of you?" He did not answer at once. The sun cut through the window and struck the silver scar along his jaw. He watched it, as if he could see it on his own face in the glass. "Toulouse," he said at last. "Spring of 14. A French surgeon who did not know who I was." "That," Clara said, very quietly, "is a long time to be alone in a room, Your Grace." "Ashby." "Ashby." He turned from the window. He did not touch her. He did not speak. He walked the length of the gallery back toward the study, and she watched him go, and she knew, with a certainty that arrived all at once, the way weather arrives, that she was going to have a problem here. She had been hired to keep her aunt company. She was going to fall in love with the most feared man in England, and it was going to be her own fault entirely, because no one had forced her to ask him when he had last sat in a room with someone who was not afraid. She went to find Delphine, who was sitting up, taking beef broth, and reading the letters in the Morning Chronicle aloud to an alarmed housemaid. "Aunt Delphine?" "Clara, sit. Listen to what Lady Ashburn has done now." "Aunt, did you know he was Ravenscar?" Delphine folded the paper. She looked at her great niece over her spectacles with the expression of a woman who had managed 50 years of excellent marriages by knowing when to feign ignorance and when to give it up. "Yes," she said. "Your Uncle Matthew and his father were at Oxford together. I knew where we were going, child." "You did not tell me?" "No." "Why not?" "Because," Delphine said, "I wanted him to meet a woman who did not know who he was before she met him." Clara sat down on the edge of the bed. "Aunt Delphine?" "Yes, dear." "Did you stage a carriage accident?" "Certainly not. I am 73 and I could have broken my neck. I merely chose an old road I had not travelled in 11 years, at a season of known bad weather, in a carriage that was not my freshest. You managed the rest." Clara put her face in her hands. "I am going to say something impertinent, Aunt." "Do." "You are a menace." "I know, child." Delphine patted her on the knee and returned to the paper. She first heard the name Denton on the evening of the 9th day. She was in the South Library with Ashby. She had begun to sit there in the evenings, after Delphine was settled for the night, with a book of her own and one of the household ledgers for company. He worked at the desk. She read by the fire. They did not speak for hours at a time. It was the most companionable silence she had ever shared with anyone. That evening, a letter was brought in on a silver salver. Ashby broke the seal, read one side, read the other, and went very still. Clara, who had been reading the same sentence for 4 minutes because the fire was warm and the evening was long, and she was tired in a contented way she had not been tired in years, set her book down. "Bad news." "A cousin," he said, "is coming to visit." "Which cousin?" "Denton, third in line to the title. A great favourite of my mother's before she went, and mine, before he was not." "I take it," she said carefully, "that you did not invite him." "No." "When does he arrive?" "He is 40 miles off. He arrives the day after tomorrow." She watched him fold the letter and slip it into his breast pocket and stand. His face had gone to the expression she had seen on the road. Not anger, not fear. The flat attention of a man looking at a thing that might be about to unmake him. "Ashby." "Miss Winslow." "Tell me." He did. Not all of it. Enough. A cousin who had managed the Ravenscar estate during the 3 years Ashby had been on campaign. A cousin who had, during those years, taken liberties with the accounts, small ones, then larger, that Ashby had discovered on his return and declined to prosecute, because to do so would have required exposing the family to a court, and the family had already been exposed to enough. A cousin who had, accordingly, spent the 2 years since Ashby's return telling a different version of the story in the drawing rooms of London. That the young Duke had come home from the war broken, that he could not manage his own affairs, that he had accused his own kin to cover his own failures, that, most lethal of all, most quietly poisonous, something terrible had happened under Ashby's command in Portugal that no one would speak of, because the men who had been there had not come home either. The last part, Ashby said, looking at the fire. "Is it true," Clara said, "that something terrible happened under my command?" "Yes." He considered her across the room. She had the sense, again, of being looked at by a man who was deciding what to trust. "Yes," he said, "it is true." The story Denton tells is not. What is the story Denton tells? That I ordered a charge against sense and lost 70 men. And the true story? He was a long time answering. My commanding officer, he said, ordered a charge against sense. I could not refuse the order. I could choose how to carry it. I led from the front. I did not lose 70. I lost 9. The other 61 were lost by the 2nd Regiment, under another command 2 hours later, because the first charge had not dislodged the position, and a second was ordered with the same plan. And you carry the 9? I carry all 70, Miss Winslow. The 9 are my burden. The 61 I cannot set down, because the man who commanded them was my friend, and he did not come home. And if I tell the full story, I dishonor him. So I tell nothing. And Denton, he said very quietly, tells everything, and has been telling it for 2 years, in every drawing room he can enter. She was quiet. Ashby. Yes. I'm going to say a thing. I'm going to say it once, and I'm not going to say it again. And then we will go back to our books, yes? Yes. You did not fail those men. You are failing yourself. He did not speak. And I have known you 9 days, she said. In 9 days, I have watched you stay up till 2 in the morning, trying to keep 9 families above the waterline, and you have not mentioned it to a soul in this house. Your servants are frightened of you, because you have not permitted yourself to be kind to them in 2 years. And you have not permitted yourself to be kind because you think you do not deserve to be anything but what you are. You are wrong, Ashby. And if your cousin comes here with a smile and an edge in his pocket, I will not let him use it on you in my presence. I warn you of this. It is not a thing I can help. She picked up her book. She put it down. She put her hands flat in her lap to stop them trembling, and she looked at him. And she waited. He crossed the room in 4 strides. He did not touch her. He went to one knee in front of her chair, a thing he would have done for a horse, a wounded man, a child, a thing he would never in his life do for a woman of quality in a drawing room. He rested his forearm on the arm of her chair, and his face was level with hers, and he said, with something in his voice she had not heard before, something breaking under the even tone like ice cracking in deep water, Miss Winslow. Ashby, I have no idea what to do with you. Start with thank you, she said, and she was half laughing and half not, and her hand, she saw it happen as if from somewhere outside herself, reached out and rested against his jaw, right along the line of the silver scar. He closed his eyes. He did not lean into her hand. He did not move away. He held perfectly still, like a man holding a thing he was not sure he was permitted to have, and she felt his breath go out of him and come back in, shakier than it had gone. Thank you, he said, very softly. You are welcome. She took her hand away. He rose. He crossed to the fire. He placed his palm flat against the marble of the mantel, as he had the first evening, and he stood there for a long moment, with his back to her, and she could see his shoulders working through the good wool of his coat. Miss Winslow. Yes, Ashby. Denton is dangerous. I do not doubt it. You will be gone from here before he arrives. Something cold went through her. What? I will send you to London, he said, still facing the fire. To your uncle's house, tonight or tomorrow. Mrs. Pelham will see to your aunt. She is well past the worst of it. You do not need to be under this roof when he comes in. Ashby, no. Miss Winslow, you are not sending me. He turned. His face had gone back to the road face, the flat, soldier attention. The man who had lifted her out of the mud as if she were light. I am, he said, sending you. He had her trunk packed by dawn. She did not see him do it. She woke, if sleep was the right word for the hour and a half she had managed between the library and sunrise. to find Mrs. Pelham in her room with a candle and an apology and a ready bag.
Miss, where is he? In the stable yard, miss, with the carriage.
He has ordered the carriage.
Yes, miss.
Without consulting me.
Miss Winslow?
Mrs. Pelham looked, for the first time since Clara had met her, as though she might actually be angry about something.
He is trying to keep you safe. It is the first thing he has tried to keep safe in 2 years that was not an estate. Please, be angry later.
Clara dressed in silence. She did not dress in the amber muslin. She dressed in the travelling gown, a deep moss-green wool, high-necked, the kind of gown a woman wore when she meant to be taken seriously by coachmen and innkeepers and men at the ends of long roads. She let Mrs. Pelham pin her hair. She did not speak. She went up to see Delphine before she went down to the yard.
He is sending me to Uncle Matthew's,
she said. Delphine, who had been forewarned by Mrs. Pelham and was sitting up with an expression Clara could not read, said only, "Yes."
Do you require me to stay?
No, child. I am fit for travel in a week. Mrs. Pelham and I have been old friends since you were a kitten. I will go on to York as arranged.
I see.
Clara.
Yes, Aunt.
Go down to the yard. Say what you mean to say. Do not go to London until you have said it. I will not speak to you again if you go to London before you have said it.
Aunt.
Go. She went. The courtyard was grey with pre-dawn light. The carriage, his, not her aunt's, stood at the mounting block with a pair of greys in harness and a coachman on the box who was studying the cobbles with the intensity of a man who had been told to be somewhere else in his head. Her trunk was already strapped on. Ashby stood at the open door. She walked across the cobbles. Her heels rang. The grooms melted backward into the stable arch. He did not look at her until she was 3 paces from him. Then he did. Grey eyes. The same grey eyes. A face that had not slept. Miss Winslow.
Your Grace.
Ashby.
No, Your Grace, not today. Today you are sending me to London without my consent. Today I am going to observe the proprieties. Good morning, Your Grace.
His jaw tightened. He opened the carriage door wider. He offered her his hand. She did not take it. She stepped up on her own, on the block, and ducked into the carriage, and sat with her spine straight against the velvet squab. She arranged her skirts. She set her gloved hands on her knees. She looked straight ahead. He closed the door. He stood beside the carriage for 1 breath. 2. She did not look at him. Then he stepped back, and she heard his boots on the cobbles, and she heard him say to the coachman, she heard him say it, in the measured voice of a man giving the last order of a campaign. Hold a moment. And the boots moved away from the carriage, toward the house. He was walking back to the house. He was not going to say goodbye. He was not going to speak. He was going to turn and walk inside, and she was going to be driven out of the gate. And that was the last of it. All of it. The library and the maps and the pears and his hand at her elbow in the mud. She leaned to the window. She put her hand on the frame. She said 1 word. Stay. It was not a question. It was not a plea. It was the quiet, exact opposite of the word he had just given the coachman, and she said it to his back, across 8 yards of cobbles in a grey October dawn. And the moment it left her mouth, she knew 2 things. She knew she had never said a truer word in her life, and she knew he had heard her. He stopped. He did not turn. The coachman, 40 feet away, did not breathe. I am trying, Ashby said to the courtyard, to keep you breathing. Stay. She said it again. She did not say anything else. She did not decorate it. She did not explain. She simply said the word, and she watched his shoulders, good wool, scarred man, 2 years of silence, and she waited. He turned. He crossed the cobbles in 4 strides, the way he had crossed the library. He opened the carriage door. He looked at her in the grey light, and his face had changed. The road face was gone. Something else was there. Something unarmed.
Miss Winslow.
Ashby, come out of the carriage. Say please.
Please. She came out of the carriage. He did not take her hand this time. He put his arm behind her shoulders, as if she were made of something breakable, as if she might yet fly away, and he walked her back across the yard to the house. Mrs. Pelham, who had been watching from the morning room window, burst into tears. The coachman, who had been holding his breath for approximately a full minute, exhaled like a bellows. The grooms looked at one another. One of them actually laughed, out loud, for the first time since Waterloo, and then looked horrified at himself, and then looked pleased. At the door of the hall, Ashby stopped. He did not take her inside at once. He stood with her in the portico, looking down at her with the grey eyes, and he said, quite low, for her only, "Miss Winslow." "Why?" "Because," she said, "I do not sit well, Ashby, and I do not leave well either. Not from places I have begun to belong in. Denton can come. I am not afraid of Denton. I am afraid of this house going quiet again. Do not send me out of it." Clara. It was the first time he had used her given name. She did not answer. She put her palm flat against the lapel of his coat, over his heart, and she felt it, through the wool, through the waistcoat, through whatever else he wore, beating very hard and very steadily, the way the heart of a horse beats when you have got the buckle free. "All right," he said. "All right." He took her inside. Denton arrived the day after tomorrow, as promised, at 3 in the afternoon, in a travelling coach the colour of red wine, drawn by 4 matched blacks, and driven at a speed more suited to a London thoroughfare than a country drive. He stepped out onto the gravel in a coat of deep plum velvet, fair hair cut in the new Parisian style, a face that would have stopped traffic at Almack's. He was, Clara conceded privately, beautiful. He was also the first man she had met at Ravenscar who smiled before he had a reason. "Cousin," Ashby said on the steps. "Cousin," Denton said, and embraced him. Ashby allowed the embrace, in the way a man allows a dog to jump up at him. "And who?" Denton stepped back, found Clara behind Ashby's shoulder, and lit up as though he had found a present on his pillow. "Oh, who is this?" "Miss Clara Winslow," Ashby said, "my great-aunt's companion." A companion? How delightful. Denton took Clara's hand before she had decided whether to offer it. "And how kind of you to stay through my cousin's—" He paused, for a fraction too long. "Moods." "His Grace," Clara said, retrieving her hand, "has no moods, Lord Denton. He has excellent drainage plans and a library I should like to take to bed with me. It has been a very restful fortnight." Denton blinked. Behind him, Mrs. Pelham, who had come out to see the horses taken, made a small sound into her handkerchief and hurried away. "How charming," Denton said, still looking at Clara. "I see. Well, cousin, you must let me introduce myself properly over dinner. I have brought a very fine claret." "You have brought yourself," Ashby said, without heat. "That is sufficient." They went inside. Denton did not unpack his claret at dinner. He unpacked other things. Over 3 courses, he referred, lightly, to no fewer than 4 scandals attached to men Ashby had served with, all of whom, Clara gathered, had been gentlemen of spotless reputation before Denton began mentioning them. He made a joke about a village in Portugal. He made a joke about a captain called Ashton, whose name resembled Ashby's in ways that felt, by the 4th repetition, deliberate. He addressed every jibe to Clara, as if expecting her to gasp. Clara did not gasp. She ate her soup. She asked him about his horses. She asked him about his tailor. She asked him, between the fish and the partridge, whether he was still keeping the house in Hanover Square, or whether he had given it up after the trouble with the leasehold. Denton's eyes sharpened. "The leasehold?" he said. "Was it not a farce? I thought I heard Lady Ashbourne mention it last season. But then Lady Ashbourne mentions many things." "She does," Denton said. His smile had flattened a little. Do pass me the salt, Clara said, as though nothing had happened. After dinner, after she had withdrawn, after she had sat alone in the drawing room for the requisite 20 minutes, and then gone to the library instead because she could not stand the drawing room, she found Ashby at the desk, maps gone, a single ledger open, one hand pressed to his forehead. Ashby? Miss Winslow? Clara. He looked up. He almost smiled.
Clara. Ashby, listen to me. Hanover Square was not an idle shot. Your cousin has a history with leaseholds. I should like to see the old accounts, the ones from the years he managed for you. Clara, those are in the muniment room, 30 volumes. I've not looked at them since I came home. I have a fortnight's practice on your kitchen ledgers, Ashby. I can read an account book in my sleep. Let me at them. He looked at her for a long moment. He rose. He picked up a candelabrum. He offered her his free arm. The muniment room, he said, is in the cellar. I have been in worse places. It smells. So do I, after an afternoon with your cousin. Ashby, I am asking. All right, he said, and he led her down. The servant's stare was cold. The walls were rough lime wash that had gone grey with age, and the treads were narrow, worn in the middle from 2 centuries of feet. The candelabrum threw their shadows out ahead of them, long and unruly, across plastered turns and down into dark. Ashby went first. He did not hurry. He moved the way a man moves through a house he has never quite forgiven himself for inheriting. Deliberately, without pleasure, with the particular care of someone who knows every loose board. At the bottom of the stair, a passage ran the length of the south wing. Stone floor, iron-bound doors, the cool of the earth pressing in on both sides. A low vault overhead. Somewhere beyond the thickness of the wall, the river ran. And in the quiet, the distant thud of its winter weight came through the stone as a pulse, one felt rather than heard. Clara had been in muniment rooms before, in her uncle's house in Hertfordshire, and once in the great, hot, ink-smelling archive of the Chancellor's office in Lincoln's Inn. This was not like either. This was the cellar of a house that had held its property secret for 400 years, and it held the silence of a thing that did not often consent to be seen. Ashby lifted the iron latch of the third door on the left. The hinges made a small, civilized sound. Inside, a single stone slab served as a table. 3 walls of shelves, an oil lamp on a bracket, 1 chair. The muniment room was cold. It was stone-floored. It smelled of linen and old ink and the particular dust of undisturbed paper. And it held 31 bound volumes of estate accounts in calf and green cloth. Clara set her candelabrum on the slab in the middle and cracked open the first volume Denton's hand had touched. By 3 in the morning, she had it. Ashby. He had fallen asleep in the single chair, boots crossed at the ankle, head fallen slightly to one side, looking more like a large, tired boy than any Duke Clara had ever pictured. She was a small and specific kind of furious at having to wake him, and a larger and more specific kind of glad that he had slept in her presence at all. Ashby. She put her hand on his shoulder. He came awake in one piece. Soldiers waking, no start. Clara. Look at this. He looked. A page of careful script, a column of figures, a second page, a third. What am I looking at? Timber sales. 3 stands of oak from the South Wood, sold in 12, 13, and 14, while you were abroad. The money was entered to the estate accounts. The receipts, however, are in a different hand. Denton's hand. I have compared. And if you turn to this second ledger, this one, the one with the red spine, you will find that the amount recorded as received from the buyer is £700 less than the amount the buyer's own estate records show him as having paid. Silence. Over 3 years. Over 3 years, Ashby. He took approximately £2,100. And that is only the timber. I have not yet begun on the rents. Clara. I am not done, Ashby. I'm going to be a thorough little nuisance until dawn. But this alone, is provable. The buyer is still alive. His records exist. We can ask him. Ashby put his face in his hands. When he lifted it, he was almost laughing. She had never seen him laugh. It was the quietest laugh she had ever heard. A single huff of breath and one shake of the shoulders. And it was the most satisfying thing she had witnessed in her entire life. You, he said, are a menace. My aunt has been telling me so for 26 years. I was waiting for confirmation. Clara, come here. She came. She thought for a moment he was going to kiss her. He did not. He put his forehead against hers. Just that. His hands on her shoulders, steady. His breath on her mouth. His eyes closed. For one long moment, they stood in the cellar of Ravenscar among 30 volumes of his cousin's thefts. And he did not kiss her. And she did not turn her face up for it. And it was somehow more, not less, for being withheld. Not here, he said. Not now. I will not have our first one in a muniment room, Clara, of all places. Ashby? Yes. You thought about it. I have thought about very little else, in point of fact, since the word stay. I found it inconvenient. She laughed, against his forehead, into the cold, dusty air of the cellar. Work first, she said. Kisses later. Work first. They worked. Lady Ashburn's harvest ball was held 3 nights later at Ashburn Court, 6 miles south, and the entire country went. Because the entire country went to everything Lady Ashburn did. Ashbourne Court was a newer house than Ravenscar, built in the rich, ornamental style of the last reign, with a long ballroom of buttery panelling and 12 French doors opening onto a gravel terrace. 3 great chandeliers hung the length of the room, each carrying 4 dozen candles, and by 9 o'clock, the air inside smelled of beeswax and roses, and the faint, pleasant sweetness of port spilled on wool. A string band played from a dais at one end. A footman circulated with champagne coupes on a tray so heavy he walked slowly and gravely, as though bearing a sacrament. Lady Ashburn herself stood at the head of the room in violet silk and a collar of amethysts the size of walnuts, receiving the county with the satisfied expression of a woman who had, after considerable planning, assembled exactly the cast she wanted for an evening she had every intention of enjoying. Clara, entering on Ashby's arm, took 2 steps into the ballroom and understood that she was the only thing in the room that was not polite. Clara had been persuaded, by Delphine, by Mrs. Pelham, and finally by Ashby himself, to accept an amber gold silk gown that Delphine produced, in a frankly suspicious manner, from a trunk she had insisted was full of old linens. The gown fit Clara as though it had been made for her, which, on reflection, it almost certainly had been. Delphine, it turned out, had been preparing for this ball since approximately the week before the carriage overturned. Aunt Delphine. Yes, dear. I am going to say another impertinent thing. Do. You are still a menace. I know, dear. Stand still, you will ruin the shoulder seam. Clara went to the ball in amber gold silk, with Delphine's pearls at her throat and Ashby at her elbow in a coat of midnight blue, and the ballroom of Ashbourne Court, when the Duke of Ravenscar walked in for the first time in 2 years with a woman on his arm who was laughing at him, went silent for approximately 3 seconds, and then very loud indeed. Lady Ashbourne sailed over at once. Ravenscar, you came. Lady Ashbourne. And who is this? Miss Clara Winslow, of Hertfordshire, my great-aunt's companion. A companion in that gown? Oh, my dear girl, we are going to be friends immediately. Come. She was taken, politely, kindly, and thoroughly, from Ashby's arm for precisely 40 minutes. Clara endured introductions to 27 people, whose names she committed to memory the first time, and used correctly the second. She danced twice. She did not accept a third set.
She found Ashby at the edge of the card room, watching her, and she took a glass of champagne from his hand, and she said, under her breath, "Denton is here." "I have seen him." "He will try it tonight?" "Yes." "I have the page from the timber ledger in my reticule." Ashby looked at her. He looked at the reticule. He looked briefly at the ceiling, as a man looks at the ceiling when he has been given a gift he does not know how to accept. "Clara, Ashby, if he does it, if he stands in public and says the thing about Portugal, do not speak first. Let me speak first. If I fail, then..." "If you fail?" "Then you may burn him." "Understood." Denton did it, as promised, at 11 o'clock in the long gallery, in front of the Earl of Marchmont, Lady Ashburn, 3 colonels who had served on the peninsula, and a ring of onlookers perhaps 40 deep. He did it smiling. He did it as a toast. He raised his glass to Ashby across the crowd, and he said, loudly and warmly, "To my cousin, the Duke of Ravenscar, who did for 70 men at Toulouse what most of us could not do for 7, whose modesty has kept the tale from England this long. To Ravenscar, the hero." It landed. It always did. The joke, the word hero with a poisoned edge, the impossible accusation inside the compliment. A ripple went through the gallery. One of the colonels looked down. Another looked at Ashby with an expression that was already, unbelievably, reconsidering. Ashby set his glass on the tray of a passing footman. "Cousin," he said, very quietly. "Thank you. I will answer that in a moment. First, and here he did a thing Clara had not expected. He turned. He put out his hand to her. She took it. He led her to the center of the gallery with no speech, no preamble, no drama. He just walked her out into the middle of the crowd with her hand in his, and he stopped there, and he turned to face his cousin, and he said, in the even voice he used for drainage and tenants and all the other things he was trying to keep breathing, "Lord Denton, I will speak to the 70 men of Toulouse directly, and I will speak to them honestly, and I will do it in the Morning Chronicle on Tuesday, because they deserve their names said. But before I do, I should like to introduce you and the company to Miss Clara Winslow, who spent the nights of this week in my muniment room at Ravenscar, with a single candle and 30 volumes of estate accounts, and who has uncovered, and documented, and verified against the private records of the Earl of Hadley, from whom I received a letter this afternoon, that you, cousin, over the 3 years you managed my estate in my absence, sold timber that you did not report, pocketed rents that you did not remit, and entered in my household books the sum of £2,118 11 shillings, less than you received. I do not speak of this tonight to ruin you, cousin. I speak of it tonight because you began this conversation, and it seemed kind to finish it." He did not raise his voice. He did not raise it once. He said it the way he had said in the carriage yard, "I am trying to keep you breathing." Denton had gone white. Lady Ashburn had gone, for the first time in her life, silent. The colonel nearest Ashby, the one who had looked down, looked up. He said in a voice everyone heard, "And the 70, Ravenscar. On Tuesday." "On Tuesday," Ashby said. "I was at Toulouse," the colonel said. "My regiment came in behind yours. I will write to the Chronicle on Wednesday." "Thank you." "And I," said Lady Ashburn, recovering, and recovering magnificently, "will be having a very long talk with your cousin, Ravenscar, about his welcome in my house. Denton, walk with me. Now." She took Denton by the arm in a grip that brooked no argument and removed him from the room. The gallery broke into sound. Ashby did not move. He stood with Clara's hand in his, and he looked down at her. Amber gold silk, pearls, laughing eyes. The kind of laugh that was not quite sure whether it was a laugh or something else. And he said, for her alone, beneath the cover of the band striking up again. Miss Winslow.
Ashby,
Will you marry me?
at Lady Ashburn's ball, in the long gallery, in front of 3 colonels.
Yes.
Ashby,
Yes.
yes.
He lifted her hand. He kissed her gloved knuckles, in full view of the gallery, not as a gentleman kisses a cousin, but as a man kisses a woman he has been, against all plans, quietly in love with since the mud of a road by a blocked culvert. And the gallery, the entire county, in its jewels and its feathers, and its prejudices, and its sudden delighted appetite for a new story, approximately lost its mind. They rode home together. It was after midnight. The moon was full. The road from Ashbourne Court to Ravenscar ran under the same avenue of lime trees, amber gold by day, silver by the moon. Clara had taken off her gloves. Ashby had taken off his. Their hands were closed together on the carriage seat between them, and neither of them had spoken for a mile.
Clara. Yes?
I owe you a great deal.
No, you do not.
Clara.
Ashby, listen to me. I have been listening to you owe things for 3 weeks. I will not marry a man who owes me anything. You owe me nothing. I came to your house by accident. I stayed by choice. I read your cousin's accounts because I am a nuisance. And I said the word I said in the courtyard because it was true. That is the sum of it. No debt. Do you understand?
He was quiet. I understand.
Say it back to me, Ashby. I am marrying a man who owes me nothing. Say it.
I owe you nothing, Clara.
Thank you.
She leaned her head against his shoulder. They rode the last 2 miles in silence, and the silence was the first silence at Ravenscar that was neither frightened nor angry nor waiting. It was the silence of 2 people taking up residence in the same quiet. At the house, he handed her down. He did not let go of her hand.
Clara. Ashby.
I would like, he said, with the careful formality of a man handling something breakable, to kiss you now, if you will permit.
If I will permit.
Yes.
Ashby. Oh, Ashby.
She stepped into his coat as though it had been waiting for her, and he put his arms around her in the cold of the portico, and he kissed her. Not a muniment room almost kiss, not a hand at the lapel, but the full and proper and long-delayed thing. His mouth warm, his hand cradling the back of her head as though her skull were the delicate instrument of his entire life's work. Her pearls cool against his waistcoat, his breath catching once in the middle of it. When she came up for air, she found she was laughing, helplessly, against his mouth.
What?
He said, very softly.
I was just thinking.
Mrs. Pelham is watching from the morning room window again. Mrs. Pelham, Ashby said, without turning to Jack,
has wept into her handkerchief twice this week. She may do it a 3rd time. She has earned it.
Very well.
Clara? Yes?
Stay.
Yes.
He kissed her again.
She married him in the spring, in the little church at the edge of the South Wood, and it was a small wedding because she wanted it small, and because Ashby had discovered, in the months between the harvest ball and the hawthorn blossom, that he would do almost anything she asked, as long as she asked it plainly. Delphine came down from York with a new bonnet and a new walking stick and a very smug expression. Mrs. Pelham wore sapphire blue silk, which Clara had bought her, and wept through the entire service.
Harris, who had recovered the use of his entire personality since the autumn, served the wedding breakfast, and gave a short toast that was, by universal agreement, 1 sentence too long, but forgiven on grounds of sheer goodwill. Denton did not attend. Denton was in Brussels, a detail Clara did not inquire into. The first article in the Morning Chronicle had gone to press on a Tuesday in October. The second, written by the Colonel, had gone to press on the Wednesday. The third and fourth, unprompted, written by other men who had been there, had gone to press the following week. By Christmas, the name the drawing rooms associated with the Duke of Ravenscar had quietly changed. It was not feared. It was not hero either. It was, in a manner difficult to define, the name of a man whom one would wish to have stand next to one in a bad moment. Clara did not read the articles. She had lived through the ball. That was enough. 6 months after the wedding, on the morning of early hawthorn blossom, Clara stood in the stable yard in a peacock blue day dress, with her hand on the bridle of a bay mare, and watched her husband teach a 5-year-old boy, Delphine's great-nephew Thomas, come down from York for Easter, how to sit a pony. Ravenscar in May was a different house. The cobbles still rang the same, and the grey stone still took the morning sun without warming to it in the way newer stone did. But the flower beds along the south wall were fat with hyacinths, and the climbing rose that Clara had coaxed back to life in March had decided, for reasons known only to itself, to throw out a single absurd early bud. 3 of the windows on the upper gallery had been repaired and repainted. The coach house had a new roof. The lime avenue had been thinned of a half-dozen trees that were past their prime, and the gate cottages had been rethatched in the autumn, and the 9 families in the South Valley had passed the winter dry. The grey cat, now a permanent kitchen resident, had produced 4 kittens in the pantry in March, and was being, in Mrs. Pelham's phrase, insufferable about them. The pony was 14 hands. The boy was determined. Ashby had one hand on the boy's boot and one hand on the pony's neck, and he was talking quietly, the way he talked to horses. You do not grip with your knees, young sir. You grip with your calves. And you breathe. The pony will feel it if you do not breathe. Breathe now. The boy breathed. The pony took 2 soft steps across the cobbles. The boy, Thomas, named for her brother, laughed in sheer joy. Clara felt something very old turn over inside her chest. Ashby caught her eye across the yard. He had changed in 6 months. Not much. He still wore indigo. He still ate his toast in the same careful way. He still rose before dawn, though the maps on the desk now had her hand on them as often as his. But there was something in the corners of his face that had gone easy. Permanently, she thought. Permanently. And when he smiled at her across the yard, over a laughing boy on a bay pony in the light of May, it was not the ghost smile of the first dinner. It was the whole thing. He walked over to her. He took her hand. Your nephew, he said, is going to be an absolute horror in about 8 years. Yes. I look forward to it. Yes. He lifted her hand. He kissed her palm. He laid it against his jaw, along the line of the silver scar, the way she had laid it the first night in the library, and his eyes were the colour of a clear October morning, and nothing else. Clara. Yes. Stay. Always. And she laughed, the full, warm, audible laugh, the laugh that had first arrived in the entrance hall of Ravenscar, with mud on her boots and wet hair, and nothing left to lose. And it rang off the cobbles, and it rang off the grey stone, and it rang through every open window of the house. And the house, which had been silent for a very long time, and then had been loud with a different kind of silence, and then had begun, slowly and then all at once, to ring with the sound of a woman laughing in its halls, heard her, and held the sound, and rang it back. If you have ever said one word to someone at exactly the right moment, and felt the whole shape of a life change with it, tell me in the comments. I love hearing your stories. Subscribe for another this weekend, and sleep well tonight.